In a quiet town in Ohio, where life usually moved at a slow and predictable pace, an incident occurred that would shake the community to its core. It all began on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when Officer Mark Thompson, a man known for his tough reputation and controversial behavior, stepped into a local supermarket. What seemed like a routine errand quickly turned into a confrontation that exposed deep-rooted issues of racism and abuse of power. Officer Mark Thompson was no stranger to controversy. He had been serving on the police force for over 15 years, but his name often appeared in complaints filed by residents. Many accused him of targeting people based on their race, particularly African Americans and Latinos. Despite these accusations, Thompson had managed to keep his job, though his relationships with some members of the community were strained. On this particular day, he walked into the supermarket wearing plain clothes but carrying his service weapon, a habit he never broke, even during personal outings. The store was bustling with activity. Families pushed carts down aisles, children reached for snacks on lower shelves, and cashiers rang up purchases at the checkout counters. Among the shoppers was Special Agent David Carter, an African-American FBI agent stationed nearby. David had just finished a long day at work and decided to stop by the supermarket to pick up groceries for dinner. Dressed casually in jeans and a hoodie, he blended in seamlessly with the crowd. David's cart was already half full. Milk, eggs, vegetables, and a box of pasta sat neatly arranged inside. He was standing near the dairy aisle examining containers of yogurt when he noticed someone approaching him. At first, he didn't think much of it. People often stopped to ask questions or borrow shopping baskets. But as the figure drew closer, David realized it was Officer Thompson. The officer's stern expression and rigid posture immediately set off alarm bells. Without introducing himself or explaining his presence, Thompson demanded to know what David was doing in the store. His tone was sharp and accusatory, catching David off guard. "What are you doing here?" Thompson barked, his eyes narrowing as he scanned David from head to toe. David, taken aback by the sudden questioning, responded politely. "I'm just shopping," he said, gesturing toward his cart filled with groceries. "Is there a problem?" But Thompson wasn't satisfied. Instead of accepting David's explanation, he pressed further, his voice growing louder with each passing second. "Why are you loitering around this store? You don't look like you belong here," he snapped, glancing suspiciously at the items in David's cart. The word loitering stung. David knew exactly what Thompson meant. He didn't fit the officer's idea of who should be in the store. It wasn't about the groceries. It was about the color of his skin. Still, David remained calm. He had dealt with difficult situations before, both as an FBI agent and as a black man living in America. He understood the importance of keeping his cool, especially when faced with hostility. "I'm not loitering," David replied firmly, maintaining eye contact. "I'm buying food just like everyone else here." To prove his point, he opened his wallet and showed Thompson his FBI badge. "I'm a federal agent," he added, hoping the revelation would put an end to the confrontation. But instead of backing down, Thompson reacted with anger. His face reddened and he clenched his fists. "You think flashing a fake badge is going to scare me?" he spat, stepping closer to David. The tension in the air was palpable, and nearby shoppers began to take notice. Some paused mid-step, while others discreetly pulled out their phones to record the scene unfolding before them. Then, without warning, Thompson reached for his gun. In one swift motion, he unholstered his weapon and pointed it directly at David. The sound of gasps rippled through the aisle as witnesses froze in shock. David instinctively raised his hands, his heart pounding in his chest. Years of training kicked in, reminding him not to make any sudden movements that could escalate the situation further. "Put your hands where I can see them," Thompson shouted, his finger hovering dangerously close to the trigger. David complied, keeping his palms visible and his voice steady. "Officer, I'm a federal agent," he repeated, enunciating every word carefully. "You're making a mistake." Despite David's efforts to de-escalate the situation, Thompson refused to listen. He continued shouting accusations, claiming that David must have stolen the badge to impersonate law enforcement. The absurdity of the accusation only fueled the growing outrage among bystanders. Several customers called 911 reporting the incident and describing how a police officer was threatening another man with a gun. As the minutes ticked by, the standoff grew increasingly tense. Shoppers crouched behind displays or hid in corners, fearing the worst. Parents shielded their children, whispering reassurances that everything would be okay. Meanwhile, David stood his ground, acutely aware that one wrong move could cost him his life. He focused on breathing deeply, trying to project calmness despite the chaos surrounding him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, backup arrived. Officers from the local precinct rushed into the store, guns drawn, unsure of what they were walking into. It took several moments for them to piece together the truth. The man pointing the gun was one of their own, and the person being threatened was a legitimate FBI agent. Once the misunderstanding became clear, Thompson was ordered to lower his weapon and step away from David. Even then, Thompson resisted, arguing that he was justified in his actions. "He's lying," he insisted, his voice tinged with desperation. "This guy is dangerous." But the evidence told a different story. Witness accounts coupled with video footage captured by horrified shoppers painted a damning picture of Thompson's conduct. The videos, which quickly went viral online, showed him aggressively confronting David, pulling his gun without provocation, and refusing to back down even after seeing David's badge. For the first time, the public saw undeniable proof of the kind of behavior that had long been rumored about Thompson. As the dust settled and the initial shock wore off, the community began to grapple with the implications of what had happened. Conversations erupted in homes, workplaces, and social media platforms. How could something like this occur in broad daylight, in a public place? Why did Thompson feel entitled to treat someone this way? And most importantly, what did it say about the state of policing in their town? For David, the experience left a lasting impact. Though physically unharmed, the emotional toll was undeniable. He couldn't shake the image of Thompson's gun pointed at him, nor the feeling of helplessness that came with knowing his life had been in someone else's hands. Yet, amidst the fear and frustration, David also felt a sense of purpose. He realized that his ordeal was bigger than just him. It was a reflection of systemic issues that needed to be addressed. Little did anyone know, this was only the beginning. The events of that day in the supermarket would spark a chain reaction, leading to investigations, trials, and ultimately, calls for change that would reverberate far beyond the small Ohio town. The aftermath of the supermarket incident sent shockwaves through the small Ohio town, leaving residents divided and grappling with uncomfortable truths. While some dismissed Officer Mark Thompson's actions as a one-time mistake, others saw them as part of a larger pattern of misconduct, rooted in prejudice and unchecked authority. As news of the confrontation spread, fueled by viral videos and eyewitness accounts, the spotlight turned to the systemic issues that had allowed such behavior to persist for so long. Public reaction and growing tensions. In the days following the incident, the community found itself at odds. Social media platforms buzzed with heated debates, hashtags like Teach Justice for David and End Police Brutality trending nationwide. Supporters of David Carter praised his composure during the harrowing encounter, hailing him as a symbol of resilience against racial profiling. Meanwhile, defenders of Thompson argued that he was simply doing his job, claiming that the situation had been blown out of proportion. At the center of the controversy were the bystanders who had witnessed the event firsthand. Many of them couldn't shake the memory of seeing a police officer point a gun at an unarmed man, a black man, over something as trivial as shopping. Sarah Miller, a young mother who had been in the store with her 2 children, recounted the terror she felt watching the scene unfold. "It was horrifying," she told reporters during an interview. "I kept thinking, what if he pulls the trigger? My kids were crying, and I didn't know how to explain what was happening." Sarah wasn't alone in her fear. Dozens of shoppers described feeling trapped and helpless as the standoff continued. Some recorded videos on their phones, capturing every tense moment. These recordings became pivotal pieces of evidence, showing not only Thompson's aggressive demeanor, but also David's calm and measured response. In one clip, David could be heard repeatedly identifying himself as an FBI agent while keeping his hands raised. The contrast between his composed demeanor and Thompson's escalating hostility was stark, leaving little room for doubt about who was in the wrong. Internal investigation begins. As public outrage grew, pressure mounted on local authorities to take action. The police department launched an internal investigation into Thompson's conduct, though many doubted its impartiality, given the close-knit nature of law enforcement communities. Critics pointed out that similar investigations in the past had often resulted in minimal consequences, allowing officers accused of misconduct to return to duty without facing meaningful accountability. Despite these concerns, the FBI stepped in demanding a thorough review of the incident. Special Agent David Carter cooperated fully with investigators, providing detailed statements and sharing footage he had captured on his phone before the confrontation escalated. His cooperation underscored his commitment to seeking justice, not just for himself, but for all those affected by discriminatory practices within policing. Meanwhile, Thompson was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the inquiry. For someone accustomed to wielding power, being sidelined proved difficult. Friends and colleagues described him as frustrated and defensive, insisting that he had acted appropriately under the circumstances. "Mark's a good guy," said one fellow officer speaking anonymously to avoid backlash. "He might have overreacted, but he thought he was protecting people. That's what cops are supposed to do." But this defense did little to quell the growing calls for accountability. Protesters gathered outside the police station holding signs that read "Accountability Now" and chanting slogans like "No justice, no peace." Among them were members of civil rights organizations, activists, and concerned citizens who saw the incident as emblematic of broader issues plaguing law enforcement across the country. Uncovering a troubled history. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a troubling pattern of behavior linked to Thompson. Records revealed multiple complaints filed against him over the years, many alleging racial profiling or excessive use of force. One case involved a Latino teenager who claimed Thompson had pulled him over without cause and searched his car, only to find nothing illegal. Another complaint came from an elderly African-American woman who said Thompson had detained her for hours after accusing her of shoplifting, a claim later proven false. These incidents painted a disturbing picture of an officer whose actions consistently targeted marginalized groups. Yet, despite the mounting evidence, Thompson had faced few consequences. Reprimands were rare, and when they did occur, they were minor, verbal warnings or brief suspensions that did little to deter future misconduct. This lack of accountability infuriated advocates for reform, who argued that it created a culture where officers believed they were above the law. One particularly damning revelation emerged during interviews with supermarket employees. Several workers recalled previous encounters with Thompson, describing him as arrogant and dismissive. "He'd come in here acting like he owned the place," said Maria Lopez, a cashier who had worked at the store for 5 years. "If he saw someone he didn't like, he'd start questioning them. It didn't matter if they were customers or employees, he treated everyone like suspects." Media coverage amplifies the story. National news outlets picked up the story, amplifying its reach and impact. Journalists highlighted the disparity between Thompson's treatment of David and the way white shoppers were typically handled in similar situations. They also drew parallels between this case and other high-profile incidents involving police brutality, sparking discussions about systemic racism within law enforcement. Documentaries and opinion pieces dissected the events in detail, analyzing everything from Thompson's body language to the role bystanders played in documenting the altercation. The viral video, viewed millions of times online, became a focal point of these analyses. Experts noted how it exposed the raw emotions of the moment, the fear in David's eyes, the anger in Thompson's voice, and the collective anxiety of the crowd. For many viewers, it served as a chilling reminder of the dangers faced by people of color in everyday scenarios. Calls for reform gain momentum. Amidst the scrutiny, calls for reform gained significant traction. Community leaders organized town hall meetings to address concerns about policing practices and propose solutions. Attendees included local politicians, law enforcement officials, activists, and ordinary citizens eager to contribute to the conversation. The atmosphere was charged, with emotions running high as participants shared personal stories of discrimination and mistreatment. One proposal suggested implementing mandatory bias training for all officers, emphasizing the importance of cultural sensitivity and de-escalation techniques. Another called for increased transparency in disciplinary proceedings, arguing that current systems lacked accountability and allowed problematic officers to remain on the force. Some even advocated for the establishment of independent oversight, committees tasked with reviewing cases of alleged misconduct. While not everyone agreed on the specifics, there was widespread consensus that change was necessary. Even skeptics acknowledged that the status quo was unsustainable, pointing to the damage done to trust between law enforcement and the communities they served. As one attendee put it, "We can't keep pretending this is isolated. This isn't just about one bad cop. It's about a system that lets bad cops thrive." A personal reflection. For David Carter, the weeks following the incident were a whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, he was grateful for the outpouring of support he received from strangers across the country. Messages of encouragement flooded his inbox, praising his courage and resilience. On the other hand, he struggled with the weight of what had happened. The image of Thompson's gun aimed at him haunted his thoughts, making it hard to focus on work or enjoy simple pleasures like grocery shopping. Yet, amidst the turmoil, David found purpose. He began using his platform to advocate for change, partnering with civil rights organizations to push for policy reforms. He gave interviews, attended rallies, and spoke at conferences, sharing his story in hopes of inspiring others to speak out against injustice. "This isn't just about me," he emphasized repeatedly. "It's about ensuring that no one else has to go through what I did because of the color of their skin." David's determination resonated deeply with those fighting for equality and justice. His willingness to turn a traumatic experience into a catalyst for progress inspired countless individuals to join the movement. Together, they vowed to hold institutions accountable, challenge discriminatory practices, and create a safer, fairer world for future generations. Little did anyone realize, however, that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. The battle for justice was far from over, and the fight against systemic racism required more than just words. It demanded action, persistence, and unwavering resolve. But for now, the momentum was building, and the seeds of change had been planted. The what question remained: would they take root, or would resistance from entrenched powers stifle progress once again? The trial of Officer Mark Thompson began 6 months after the supermarket incident, marking a pivotal moment for the small Ohio town and drawing national attention. The courtroom was packed with spectators, local residents, journalists, activists, and even curious onlookers from neighboring cities, all eager to witness how justice would be served in a case that had become emblematic of broader societal issues. Opening statements. Setting the stage. As the proceedings got underway, both sides presented their opening arguments, laying out starkly different narratives of what had transpired in the supermarket aisle. The prosecution painted Thompson as a reckless officer whose actions were driven by racial bias and a blatant disregard for protocol. "This isn't just about one man pointing a gun at another," lead prosecutor Rachel Bennett declared. "It's about accountability, a reminder that no one, not even those sworn to protect us, is above the law." Defense attorney James Holloway countered this portrayal, attempting to cast doubt on David Carter's credibility. He argued that Thompson had acted out of self-defense, claiming that he believed David posed a threat due to his refusal to comply immediately. Officer Thompson made a judgment call based on limited information, Holloway stated. He wasn't targeting anyone because of their race. He was doing his duty to ensure public safety. The contrast between these two perspectives set the tone for the weeks ahead. While the prosecution aimed to highlight systemic failures within law enforcement, the defense sought to downplay the severity of Thompson's actions, framing them as an isolated overreaction rather than part of a larger pattern. Witness. Testimonies. Voices of truth. One of the most compelling aspects of the trial was the parade of witnesses called to testify. Their accounts provided vivid details about the confrontation, offering jurors a window into the chaos that unfolded in the supermarket that day. Sarah Miller, the young mother who had been shopping with her children, took the stand early in the trial. Her voice trembled as she recounted the fear she felt watching Thompson draw his weapon. "I thought someone was going to get hurt, or worse," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. When asked why she believed Thompson reacted so aggressively, Sarah hesitated before responding. "It felt like it wasn't just about what happened in the store. It was about who Mr. Carter was, the color of his skin." Other eyewitnesses echoed similar sentiments. Maria Lopez, the cashier who had worked at the supermarket for years, described Thompson's history of intimidating behavior toward minority customers. "He always seemed suspicious of people who didn't look like him," she explained. "That day you could see it in his face. He decided Mr. Carter didn't belong there before he even spoke to him." Perhaps the most powerful testimony came from Special Agent David Carter himself. Dressed in a crisp suit, David exuded calmness as he recounted the events leading up to the confrontation. He described how Thompson approached him without cause, questioned his presence in the store, and ultimately pulled a gun on him despite his repeated attempts to de-escalate the situation. When cross-examined by the defense, David remained composed, refusing to let hostile questions rattle him. At one point, Holloway accused him of provoking Thompson by reaching for his wallet too quickly. "I reached for my badge, not my wallet, to identify myself," David clarified firmly. "Any reasonable person would have understood that I was trying to explain who I am, not threaten anyone." The viral video. A turning point. Midway through the trial, prosecutors introduced the viral video footage captured by bystanders. Jurors leaned forward in their seats as the courtroom fell silent, watching the grainy but undeniable evidence unfold on a large screen. The video showed Thompson's aggressive body language, his refusal to back down even after seeing David's badge, and the palpable fear among shoppers caught in the crossfire. Prosecutor Rachel Bennett seized the opportunity to drive home her argument. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not speculation or hearsay," she said, gesturing toward the screen. "This is proof of what really happened. You can see for yourselves how Officer Thompson escalated the situation unnecessarily, putting innocent lives at risk." The defense struggled to counter the impact of the video. Holloway attempted to discredit its authenticity, suggesting that key moments might have been edited out. However, expert witnesses confirmed that the footage was genuine and unaltered, leaving little room for debate. Thompson's record under scrutiny. Another critical turning point came when prosecutors delved into Thompson's disciplinary record. They presented documents detailing numerous complaints filed against him over the years, many alleging racial profiling or excessive use of force. One particularly damning example involved a black teenager who claimed Thompson had stopped him while driving in a predominantly white neighborhood, accusing him of stealing a car that belonged to his parents. "These aren't isolated incidents," Bennett argued passionately. "They're part of a pattern that shows Officer Thompson has a history of targeting individuals based on their race. And yet, time and again, he faced no real consequences. That ends today." The defense tried to dismiss these allegations as irrelevant, arguing that past complaints shouldn't influence the current case. But the cumulative effect was undeniable. Jurors exchanged uneasy glances as they absorbed the weight of the evidence, recognizing the broader implications of allowing such behavior to go unchecked. Closing arguments, a plea for justice. By the time closing arguments rolled around, tensions in the courtroom were running high. Prosecutor Bennett delivered a stirring speech. urging jurors to consider not only the facts of the case but also the message their verdict would send. "This isn't just about punishing one bad actor," she emphasized. "It's about sending a clear signal that we will not tolerate racism or abuse of power in our communities. We owe it to ourselves, to our children, and to future generations to hold people accountable when they break the law." In response, Holloway doubled down on his earlier arguments, imploring jurors to focus solely on the events of that day. "Officer Thompson made a mistake, a serious one, but he didn't commit a crime," he insisted. "Let's not lose sight of the fact that he was trying to do his job, however imperfectly." Despite the defense's efforts, it was clear that the tide had shifted. The prosecution's case rested on overwhelming evidence, from eyewitness testimonies to the damning video footage. Even some of Thompson's own colleagues admitted privately that his actions were indefensible, though none dared speak publicly for fear of backlash. Verdict and its impact. After days of deliberation, the jury returned with a guilty verdict on charges of aggravated assault and obstruction of justice. The courtroom erupted in applause as Judge Patricia Reynolds announced Thompson's sentence: 3 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. While some criticized the relatively lenient punishment, others viewed it as a significant step toward holding abusive officers accountable. Outside the courthouse, supporters of David Carter celebrated the outcome, chanting slogans and waving signs that read, "Justice prevails." For many, the verdict represented more than just a legal victory. It symbolized hope for change in a system long plagued by inequality and injustice. For David, the decision brought a sense of closure, but also renewed determination. In interviews, following the trial, he expressed gratitude for the support he received but stressed the importance of continuing the fight for reform. "This is just the beginning," he said. "We've exposed the problem, but now we need to fix it. Together, we can create a world where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued." As the dust settled and the media circus moved on to other stories, the town began the difficult process of healing. Community leaders organized forums to discuss ways to improve policing practices, while activists pushed for legislative changes aimed at increasing transparency and accountability. Though the scars of that fateful day in the supermarket would never fully fade, the trial served as a catalyst for meaningful dialogue, and a reminder that progress, however slow, is possible when people come together to demand it. The sentencing of Officer Mark Thompson marked the end of a high-profile trial, but ignited a new chapter in the ongoing struggle for justice and accountability. While some celebrated the verdict as a victory against systemic racism, others questioned whether it went far enough to address the deep-rooted issues within law enforcement. As the town grappled with the fallout, the case became a touchstone for national conversations about race, policing, and reform. Community divided, mixed. Reactions to the verdict. In the days following Thompson's sentencing, the small Ohio town found itself more divided than ever. For some residents, the guilty verdict was a long overdue reckoning, a sign that even those in positions of power could be held accountable for their actions. "It gives me hope," said Sarah Miller, the young mother who had witnessed the incident firsthand. "Maybe now people will start taking these kinds of cases seriously instead of brushing them under the rug." Others, however, remained skeptical. Many of Thompson's supporters argued that the punishment was too harsh, insisting that he had simply been doing his job. "Mark made a mistake, but he didn't deserve prison," said one local resident during an impromptu interview outside the courthouse. "He was protecting us from someone he thought might be dangerous. How is that a crime?" These conflicting viewpoints spilled over into public spaces, where debates often turned heated. At coffee shops, grocery stores, and community centers, conversations about the case dominated daily life. Some families avoided discussing it altogether, fearing arguments with loved ones who held opposing views. Others saw the division as an opportunity for growth, using the controversy to spark meaningful dialogue about privilege, bias, and systemic inequality. Local schools also felt the ripple effects. Teachers reported students engaging in passionate discussions about the trial, with many expressing frustration over what they perceived as unfair treatment of minorities. In response, several educators incorporated lessons on civil rights history and social justice into their curricula, hoping to provide context and foster understanding among younger generations. National Spotlight, a catalyst for change. Beyond the confines of the small Ohio town, the case garnered widespread attention, becoming a symbol of the broader fight against police brutality and racial profiling. National news outlets continued to cover developments, highlighting how the trial reflected larger societal struggles. Protesters across the country organized rallies inspired by David Carter's story, chanting slogans like "Enough is enough" and demanding greater accountability for law enforcement officers. Civil rights organizations seized the momentum, launching campaigns aimed at reforming policing practices nationwide. Advocates called for measures such as mandatory body cameras, stricter disciplinary protocols, and independent oversight boards to investigate misconduct allegations. They also pushed for legislation addressing qualified immunity, a legal doctrine that often shields officers from liability in civil lawsuits. Social media played a crucial role in amplifying these efforts. Hashtags like #Justice for David and #Reform Now trended repeatedly, drawing millions of posts from activists, celebrities, and everyday citizens alike. Influencers used their platforms to share resources, educate followers, and encourage participation in protests and petitions. The collective energy generated online translated into tangible action, with thousands attending marches and contacting lawmakers to voice their demands. Even politicians took notice, introducing bills designed to increase transparency and accountability within law enforcement agencies. While progress was slow and resistance from entrenched interests fierce, the heightened awareness created by cases like Thompson's kept pressure on decision-makers to act. David Carter, From Victim to Advocate. For Special Agent David Carter, the aftermath of the trial brought both relief and responsibility. Though grateful for the support he received, he knew the work was far from over. Determined to channel his experience into positive change, David became a vocal advocate for police reform, partnering with civil rights groups to push for systemic improvements. In interviews and public appearances, David spoke candidly about the emotional toll of the incident, acknowledging the fear and anger he still carried. "I've spent years training to handle dangerous situations, but nothing could have prepared me for that moment," he admitted during a speech at a national conference. "When someone points a gun at you because of the color of your skin, it changes you. It reminds you of how fragile life can be and how much work we still have to do." Despite the trauma, David refused to let bitterness consume him. Instead, he channeled his pain into purpose, traveling across the country to speak at rallies, workshops, and legislative hearings. His message was clear. Individual victories were important, but true progress required dismantling the systems that perpetuated injustice. One of David's key initiatives focused on bridging the gap between law enforcement and marginalized communities. He collaborated with experts to design training programs aimed at teaching officers cultural sensitivity, conflict resolution, and de-escalation techniques. "We need to build trust," he explained. "That starts with listening to the people most affected by discriminatory practices and working together to find solutions." David's efforts earned him widespread admiration, though not without criticism. Some accused him of being too soft on law enforcement, arguing that real change couldn't happen until radical reforms were implemented. Others praised his pragmatic approach, viewing it as a necessary step toward incremental progress. Regardless of differing opinions, there was no denying the impact David had made. He had transformed a deeply personal tragedy into a movement for justice. Thompson Behind Bars, Reflections on Accountability. Meanwhile, Officer Mark Thompson began serving his 3-year prison sentence, adjusting to life behind bars after decades of wielding authority. Friends and family visited him regularly, offering words of encouragement and vowing to appeal the conviction. But for many observers, Thompson's imprisonment served as a sobering reminder of the consequences of unchecked power. Prison proved challenging for Thompson, whose reputation preceded him. Fellow inmates mocked him for his past behavior, calling him out for targeting minorities while wearing a badge. Guards reportedly treated him with indifference, further isolating him from the outside world. According to letters written to friends, Thompson struggled to come to terms with his circumstances, oscillating between denial and regret. Back in Dalande, the town, reactions to Thompson's incarceration varied widely. Some expressed sympathy, believing that the punishment outweighed the offense. Others saw it as poetic justice, arguing that Thompson had finally faced the same fear and vulnerability he had imposed on countless individuals over the years. "Good riddance," said Maria Lopez, the supermarket cashier who had testified against him. "Maybe this will teach him, and others like him, that nobody is untouchable." Lessons learned, moving forward together. As time passed, the town slowly began to heal, though scars remained. Community leaders organized forums to facilitate open discussions about race relations and policing, inviting experts, activists, and residents to share their perspectives. These events weren't always smooth. Tensions occasionally flared, but they provided a space for honest reflection and mutual understanding. One initiative that gained traction involved forming citizen advisory boards tasked with reviewing police conduct and recommending policy changes. Comprised of diverse members representing various demographics, these boards aimed to ensure transparency and accountability within the department. While some officers initially resisted the idea, others welcomed the opportunity to rebuild trust with the community. Schools, churches, and local businesses also joined the effort, hosting workshops and educational programs focused on diversity and inclusion. Younger generations in particular embraced the movement, organizing fundraisers and art exhibits to raise awareness about racial injustice. Their enthusiasm offered a glimmer of hope for the future, suggesting that lasting change might indeed be possible. A new chapter begins. Though the road ahead remained fraught with challenges, the case of Officer Mark Thompson versus Special Agent David Carter had undeniably shifted the narrative. What began as a routine shopping trip ended as a catalyst for transformation, sparking conversations and inspiring action that transcended the boundaries of a single town. For David, the journey was just beginning. Armed with resilience and determination, he vowed to keep fighting, not just for himself but for all those who had suffered silently under the weight of systemic oppression. As he stood before crowds of supporters at rallies and conferences, his voice rang out with unwavering conviction. "This isn't just my story, it's our story. And together, we'll write the next chapter, one defined by justice, equality, and hope." The sentencing of Officer Mark Thompson and the subsequent national outcry marked a turning point for the small Ohio town. But the ripple effects of the case continued to shape lives long after the headlines faded. While some viewed the verdict as a step toward justice, others saw it as merely scratching the surface of deeper systemic issues. As the community grappled with its flaws, individuals like David Carter emerged as symbols of resilience and hope, determined to channel their pain into meaningful change. A town reflects, healing or dividing. In the months following the trial, the town remained divided. For many residents, the guilty verdict represented a rare moment of accountability, a sign that even those in positions of authority could face consequences for their actions. Community leaders organized forums to discuss the case, inviting psychologists, activists, and law enforcement officials to speak about the underlying issues of racism and abuse of power. These discussions often revealed painful truths about the town's history, with some participants admitting they had turned a blind eye to discriminatory practices for years. However, not everyone was ready to embrace reform. A vocal minority dismissed the trial as an overreaction, arguing that Thompson's punishment was excessive and unfair. "He made a mistake, but he didn't deserve prison," said one local resident during a heated town hall meeting. "We're tearing our community apart over one incident. Such sentiments sparked heated debates, with tensions occasionally boiling over into shouting matches. Despite these divisions, there were glimmers of progress. Schools introduced new curricula focused on diversity and inclusion, teaching students about civil rights history and encouraging empathy. Local businesses launched initiatives to promote racial equity, such as hiring practices aimed at increasing representation among staff. Even churches played a role, hosting prayer vigils and workshops designed to foster unity and understanding. For Sarah Miller, the young mother who had witnessed the confrontation in the supermarket, the changes felt bittersweet. "It's good to see people talking about these things," she said in an interview. "But I worry that once the attention fades, we'll go back to pretending everything is fine. Real change takes time and effort." David Carter, turning pain into purpose. Special Agent David Carter, meanwhile, became a prominent figure in the fight for police reform. His calm demeanor and unwavering determination inspired countless individuals, making him a sought-after speaker at conferences, rallies, and legislative hearings. Despite the trauma of his experience, David refused to let bitterness define him. Instead, he used his platform to advocate for systemic changes that would prevent similar incidents from happening again. One of David's primary goals was to improve training for law enforcement officers. He partnered with experts to develop programs focused on cultural sensitivity, de-escalation techniques, and implicit bias awareness. "We need to teach officers how to interact with people respectfully, regardless of their race or background," he explained during a panel discussion. "That starts with listening, not assuming someone is a threat based on stereotypes." David also worked closely with civil rights organizations to push for legislative reforms. He testified before Congress, urging lawmakers to address qualified immunity, a legal doctrine that often shields officers from liability in civil lawsuits. "If we want accountability, we have to remove barriers that protect bad actors," he argued passionately. His testimony resonated with legislators, leading to the introduction of several bills aimed at increasing transparency and oversight within policing agencies. Beyond policy work, David sought to humanize the conversation around racial profiling. In interviews and public appearances, he shared personal stories about growing up as a black man in America, highlighting the constant fear of being judged by the color of his skin. "This isn't just about me," he emphasized repeatedly. "It's about every person who has ever been treated unfairly because of who they are. We owe it to them to do better." Thompson's legacy, lessons behind bars. Officer Mark Thompson, now serving his 3-year sentence, found himself grappling with the consequences of his actions. Life behind bars proved challenging for someone accustomed to wielding authority. Fellow inmates mocked him for his past behavior, calling him out for targeting minorities while wearing a badge. Guards reportedly treated him with indifference, further isolating him from the outside world. According to letters written to friends and family, Thompson struggled to come to terms with his circumstances. At times, he expressed defiance, insisting that he had been misunderstood and unfairly punished. Other times, he acknowledged his mistakes, though reluctantly. "I never meant to hurt anyone," he wrote in one letter. "But maybe I did things wrong. I don't know anymore." Back in the town, opinions about Thompson's imprisonment varied widely. Some expressed sympathy, believing that the punishment outweighed the offense. Others saw it as poetic justice, arguing that Thompson had finally faced the same fear and vulnerability he had imposed on countless individuals over the years. "Good riddance," said Maria Lopez, the supermarket cashier, who had testified against him. "Maybe this will teach him and others like him that nobody is untouchable." National impact, a movement gains momentum. While the trial centered on a single incident in a small Ohio town, its impact reverberated across the nation. Protesters in cities from New York to Los Angeles drew inspiration from David Carter's story, organizing rallies and marches to demand greater accountability for law enforcement officers. Social media campaigns gained traction, with hashtags like #ShowJustice for David and Reform Now trending repeatedly. Influencers amplified the message, sharing resources and encouraging followers to contact lawmakers about proposed reforms. Civil rights organizations seized the momentum, launching nationwide initiatives aimed at addressing systemic racism within policing. Advocates called for measures such as mandatory body cameras, stricter disciplinary protocols, and independent oversight boards to investigate misconduct allegations. They also pushed for legislation addressing qualified immunity, a legal doctrine that often shields officers from liability in civil lawsuits. Even politicians took notice, introducing bills designed to increase transparency and accountability within law enforcement agencies. While progress was slow and resistance from entrenched interests fierce, the heightened awareness created by cases like Thompson's kept pressure on decision-makers to act. Challenges ahead, the road to reform. Despite the progress made, significant challenges remained. Critics argued that individual victories were insufficient without broader structural changes. Sentencing one bad cop doesn't fix the system, said activist Jamal Rivers during a televised debate. We need to dismantle the structures that allow discrimination and abuse to thrive. Others pointed out that reform efforts often faced backlash from powerful unions and lobbying groups representing law enforcement. These organizations frequently opposed measures aimed at increasing accountability, framing them as attacks on officers rather than necessary safeguards for communities. Even within the town itself, resistance persisted. Some residents resented the focus on racial profiling, claiming it painted an unfair picture of their community. "We're not all racist," one man protested during a town hall meeting. "Why does everything have to be about race?" Despite these obstacles, advocates remained undeterred. David Carter, in particular, continued to push for change, knowing that setbacks were inevitable but temporary. "This is a marathon, not a sprint," he told supporters during a rally. "We won't see results overnight, but if we keep fighting, we'll get there." Amidst uncertainty. As the town moved forward, signs of hope began to emerge. Citizen advisory boards tasked with reviewing police conduct gained traction, providing a space for open dialogue between law enforcement and the community. Younger generations embraced the movement, organizing fundraisers and art exhibits to raise awareness about racial injustice. Their enthusiasm offered a glimmer of optimism for the future, suggesting that lasting change might indeed be possible. For David Carter, the journey was far from over. Armed with resilience and determination, he vowed to keep fighting, not just for himself but for all those who had suffered silently under the weight of systemic oppression. As he stood before crowds of supporters at rallies and conferences, his voice rang out with unwavering conviction. "This isn't just my story. It's our story. And together, we'll write the next chapter, one defined by justice, equality, and hope." Though the scars of that fateful day in the supermarket would never fully heal, the lessons learned served as a reminder of the power of collective action. The battle for justice was far from over, but the seeds of change had been planted, and with perseverance they promised to take root. As the dust settled on the trial and sentencing of Officer Mark Thompson, the small Ohio town began to reflect deeply on its identity and future. The case had not only exposed systemic flaws, but also ignited a movement for change that rippled far beyond its borders. For Special Agent David Carter, the journey was far from over. It was a call to action, a chance to turn personal pain into collective progress. And while the scars of that day in the supermarket would never fully heal, the lessons learned offered a glimmer of hope for a better tomorrow. Building bridges, community-led initiatives, take shape. In the wake of the trial, community leaders worked tirelessly to bridge divides and foster understanding between law enforcement and residents. One of the most impactful initiatives was the creation of citizen advisory boards, tasked with reviewing police conduct and recommending policy changes. Comprised of diverse members representing various demographics, parents, teachers, business, owners, and even former officers, these boards aim to ensure transparency and accountability within the department. The first few meetings were tense, with emotions running high on both sides. Officers expressed frustration at being scrutinized, while citizens voiced long-standing grievances about discriminatory practices. Yet, over time, these sessions evolved into constructive dialogues. Participants shared stories, listened to each other's perspectives, and identified areas where improvements could be made. Slowly but surely, trust began to rebuild. Maria Lopez, the supermarket cashier who had testified against Thompson, became an active member of the board. Her presence served as a constant reminder of the stakes involved. "We're not here to point fingers," she said during one meeting. "We're here to find solutions, to make sure no one else has to go through what Mr. Carter did." Another key initiative focused on youth engagement. Local schools partnered with community organizations to host workshops and mentorship programs designed to educate students about racial equity and civic responsibility. Students participated in mock trials, debates, and art projects exploring themes of justice and equality. Many young people emerged as passionate advocates for reform, organizing fundraisers and awareness campaigns that inspired older generations. David Carter's ongoing fight, a beacon of hope. For David Carter, the fight for justice extended far beyond his hometown. As word of his story spread, invitations poured in from across the country, requests to speak at conferences, universities, and legislative hearings. David accepted them all, traveling tirelessly to share his message of resilience and reform. His speeches resonated deeply, combining personal anecdotes with calls for systemic change. "I didn't choose this path," David often began his talks. "It chose me, but now that I'm here, I have a responsibility to honor those who've suffered in silence and to push for a world where everyone feels safe and valued." One of David's proudest accomplishments was helping draft federal legislation aimed at increasing police accountability. Working alongside lawmakers and civil rights groups, he advocated for measures such as mandatory body cameras, stricter disciplinary protocols, and independent oversight committees. When the bill passed, it marked a significant milestone in the broader fight for reform. Though critics argued it didn't go far enough, David saw it as a step in the right direction. Beyond policy work, David focused on fostering empathy and understanding. He collaborated with filmmakers to produce documentaries highlighting real-life stories of racial profiling and police brutality. These films screened at festivals nationwide, sparking conversations and inspiring viewers to take action. David also launched a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting victims of discrimination and providing resources for advocacy efforts. Despite the accolades, David remained humble, always emphasizing that his work was part of a larger movement. "I'm just one person," he said in an interview. "Real change happens when we come together, as communities, as families, as individuals committed to doing better." Mark Thompson's reflections behind bars. Meanwhile, Officer Mark Thompson continued serving his sentence, grappling with the consequences of his actions. Life behind bars proved humbling for someone once accustomed to authority. Fellow sharing inmates mocked him for his past behavior, calling him out for targeting minorities while wearing a badge. Guards treated him indifferently, further isolating him from the outside world. According to letters written to friends and family, Thompson's perspective gradually shifted. At first, he clung to denial, insisting he had been misunderstood and unfairly punished. Over time, however, he began to acknowledge his mistakes, though reluctantly. "I thought I was doing my job," he wrote in one letter. "But maybe I let my biases get in the way. Maybe I hurt people without realizing it." Back in the town, reactions to Thompson's reflections varied widely. Some viewed his remorse as genuine, believing he deserved a second chance upon release. Others dismissed it as too little, too late, arguing that apologies couldn't undo the damage caused by years of discriminatory behavior. Regardless of differing opinions, Thompson's imprisonment served as a sobering reminder of the consequences of unchecked power, a lesson many hoped others would learn from. A Nation Watches. Lessons learned and challenges ahead. Nationally, The case of Officer Mark Thompson versus Special Agent David Carter became a symbol of the broader struggle for racial justice and police reform. Protesters in cities across the country drew inspiration from David's story, organizing rallies and marches to demand greater accountability for law enforcement officers. Social media campaigns gained momentum, with hashtags like #Justice for David and Reform Now trending repeatedly. Civil rights organizations capitalized on the heightened awareness, launching nationwide initiatives aimed at addressing systemic racism within policing. Advocates called for measures such as ending qualified immunity, implementing stricter hiring standards, and investing in community-based alternatives to traditional law enforcement. Even politicians took notice, introducing bills designed to increase transparency and oversight within policing agencies. Yet, despite the progress, challenges persisted. Critics argued that individual victories were insufficient without broader structural changes. Resistance from powerful unions and lobbying groups representing law enforcement often slowed or blocked reform efforts. In some communities, tensions between police and residents worsened, underscoring the complexity of the issue. Even within the Ohio town itself, resistance lingered. Some residents resented the focus on racial profiling, claiming it painted an unfair picture of their community. "Not everyone here is racist," one man protested during a town hall meeting. "Why does everything have to be about race?" Despite these obstacles, advocates remained undeterred. David Carter, in particular, continued to push for change, knowing that setbacks were inevitable but temporary. "This is a marathon, not a sprint," he told supporters during a rally. "We won't see results overnight, but if we keep fighting, we'll get there." There's hope for the future. Seeds of change. Take root. As the town moved forward, signs of hope began to emerge. Younger generations embraced the movement, using their voices and creativity to drive change. Art exhibits, poetry readings, and music performances highlighted themes of justice and equality. Drawing attention to ongoing struggles, many young activists cited David Carter as a role model, crediting his courage and determination for inspiring them to act. Community policing programs also gained traction, with officers participating in neighborhood events and engaging directly with residents. While skepticism remained, these interactions helped humanize law enforcement, fostering mutual respect and understanding. Even skeptics admitted that the atmosphere felt different, more open, more collaborative. For David Carter, the journey was far from over. Armed with resilience and purpose, he vowed to keep fighting, not just for himself but for all those who had suffered silently under the weight of systemic oppression. As he stood before crowds of supporters at rallies and conferences, his voice rang out with unwavering conviction. "This isn't just my story, it's our story, and together we'll write the next chapter, one defined by justice, equality, and hope." Though the scars of that fateful day in the supermarket would never fully heal, the lessons learned served as a reminder of the power of collective action. The battle for justice was far from over, but the seeds of change had been planted, and, with perseverance, they promised to take root. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The courage of individuals like David Carter had sparked a movement that would continue to grow, shaping a brighter, fairer future for generations to come.